Anything that will help, I shall be delighted to do for you.
Absolutely good. Right, I'm going to dive right in, Lionel, with the first question. Right, you once said the greatest miracle of all is that they allowed an old man with a cloth to become a TV presenter. So, my question to you is, how did you get involved with the series in the first place?
Well, my interest in radio and TV goes way back to the 50s, and I used to. We had a show, Anglia Television, back in Norfolk, which is where we come from, a little town called Dereham, and I had some regular programs with them, nearly always about unexplained mysteries, but these were Norfolk ones that we did, like the famous Norfolk ghost dog who was called the Black Shuck, and there were several other tales of that kind, and one of the ones I liked best was a poacher who led the Wharton gang, and they were pretty rough and unpleasant, and one night he went missing, and his corpse was found a long way away at Breckles Hall, and the legend was that he'd been the victim of the Norfolk Phantom Coach, and the song I did about that was, "The phantom coach, it rolls by night from Yarmouth to King's Lynn, and the headless horseman sits above, the headless men within. Why do they ride across the years and through the endless dark? The dead men in their phantom coach that never leaves a mark." And this guy, George Mace, was the one they carried away, and he was found dead at Breckles Hall the following morning. The verse about him was, "George Mace, he was a poacher bold, who led the Wharton gang. The constables and magistrates all swore that he would hang. But the coach rolled down that cold white road upon him and took George Mace away, and his body lay at Breckles Hall before the break of day," and so on and so on. So that when we got Fortean TV, I had all these old Norfolk stories at the back of my mind, and some of the songs which had been written, well, when I was 17, let me just work that out, it was about 1952, and which of course was the 70 years ago this year, which gives us the 70th anniversary of being a writer in print.
Fantastic. Just to go to talk about your writing, you were a prolific writer in the 1960s, weren't you, with Badger books? And
yeah, I did.
How many books did you actually write back then?
Well, I would think, I'll just check with my lovely Patricia, who is hovering out of sight. Danny, would you say over 200? Yeah, over 200.
Absolutely incredible.
Wow.
Absolutely incredible.
And I was working full time as well. And
how did you do that? How did?
Well, it's like a book every 12 days.
Yeah,
it was, and it was. I would get orders from John Spencer and Company, who were the owners of Badger Books, and there were two partners in the business. There was Solomon Sale and Michael Nahum. Sale and Nahum were the business partners. And I could be wrong because they never told me, but I think that when they'd done their 2 years military conscription and had come out with the army money that you get when you've done your 2 years, they started this little publishing business. And they were, I would get letters from them which said, "Enclosed is a rough sketch of the front cover. Send by return," never mind what else I was doing, "send by return a list of possible titles, a list of possible blurbs, and the back cover introduction." And I duly sent it because, like other guys in their late teens, I was never much money coming in from the job I was doing, and by making a bit of extra. The other thing was, you really worked hard for Spencer's Badger Books. You got 10 shillings, which would now be 50p, per 1,000 words. So I would write a 50,000 word book and get 25 quid for it.
Did all that writing experience help you when you got to Fortean TV? I mean, did it help you decide? I mean, did you have some input into the topics you covered on the TV show itself?
Yes, I just got this. Somebody must have been reading some of my old paranormal stories back from the 50s and 60s. And I got this invitation from the producer director of Fortean team saying, would I like to present this mystery program that they'd decided they were going to do? And I said, you know, if you say to a guy like me who loves radio and television work and who loves writing, would you like to do a program and talk about the mysteries you write about? You know, I nearly jumped through the ceiling with sheer delight, and I was ever so pleased to do it. And funnily enough, an awful pun of a joke. The first thing that I sold way back in 1952, 70 years ago, was called Worlds Without End. And it was taken as from the prayer, Lord, worlds without end, amen. And one or two pals have said over the intervening years, you should have left the L out of that and called it Words Without End, because you've done several since. And the basic plot of that was that the hero was a devout Christian and believer in God. And he had been sent by the scientific council, who were then ruling the earth, in a rocket ship, spaceship, to find out if the earth or if the universe had any boundaries, hence the Worlds Without End title. Did it just go on for infinity? And if there was no boundary, then it meant that the universe was just a natural phenomenon that had never had a creator, therefore there was no God. But if it had a boundary, it had been created. But he would smash into it at half the speed of light and be killed. So we had two choices. One was that his religious faith and theology would be destroyed, and the other was that he would be destroyed. And the happy ending was that he, after several hours going out towards the boundary, a gigantic hand wraps him gently and takes him back to earth and says, don't do this anymore. And that was the story.
That actually brings me to the question. The Fortean TV series has quite a quirky tone, doesn't it?
Oh, it does, yes.
And what I want to ask you, first of all, how would you describe the tone of the series? And secondly, I'm interested in particularly in faith, because there are several stories in it that are related to faith. For example, there's a Hindu one about Hindus who believe this particular cow is a messenger of the gods. There's one about, you obviously talk about the Holy Grail. There's one where Mother Teresa appears in a cinnamon bun. Some of those are treated with more reverence than others. I just wondered how you get the tone right and what the tone was.
Yeah, well, in a sense, if it's of any help as an answer, I think that I won't say Jekyll and Hyde, but I think I'm a bit of a two pieces of personality. There's the part of me which loves theology and philosophy and looking into the meaning of life. And the book that I'm working on at the moment is called The Quest for Meaning, and it's a very serious non-fiction account of what an individual personality is, who you are, who I am, what our internal psychic essence is, and then the environment around us, our family, our friends, our home, the desk where you lose the pen. And on the other hand, it goes on to look into the meaning of life and the meaning of the theology and philosophy, and wondering, has it all been made, or was it not? In a way, it's like a serious edition of the short story that I wrote, that I just described to you, called Worlds Without End. And I'm still looking to see if it is worlds.
Still waiting for that boundary. Actually, I'm going to jump to a later question I've got, actually, because you did a TED talk in 2012 in which you said that solving mysteries gives people a meaning in life. Now the question is, do you enjoy solving the mysteries, or do you prefer, you also said you preferred ones that weren't solved yet. So, I mean, do you feel there is a solution to things? Do you think there are answers beneath everything, or?
Well, I greatly enjoy looking into unsolved mysteries. And if I could just go back to what triggered it, I was a bit of a rascal at school. I didn't like school, and I wanted to get out as quickly as I could. So I never stopped to do any what were then school certificates, which have later become GCSEs and so forth. And if I had lessons that I found particularly disagreeable and boring, what I would do would be to go and sneak into it. It was a big old-fashioned building, Hammond's Grammar School in Swaffham. And this building was probably 17th, 18th century. And so the library had all these old-fashioned, beautifully carved wooden library partitions all the way down it, which meant that the master on duty in the library, sitting at the far end, if you were clever enough to creep in behind one of these big screens, you could keep very quiet and still and miss the lesson you didn't want to go to. And I did this. If I could miss Latin, I would. And if I could miss algebra, I would. And I found algebra very confusing. And as I was crouched down behind this big screen in the library, I would find some books which were in reach. And there was H.G. Wells, Jules Verne, and the other writers of mystery fiction. And so it was reading things like H.G. Wells' Tales of the Unexpected that got me interested in, now, are these real mysteries? Can they be solved? What's the answer to this? And I then, as soon as I was old enough, independent, and old enough to have a motorbike, I was here, there, and everywhere where there was a site of a mystery. And so that's what it was. H.G. Wells and Jules Verne that triggered me to look for the answer. Was I found it fascinating, and I wanted to find an answer, but I was fascinated by the process of looking, and that was where it all started.
I was going to ask Lionel, have you had any experiences yourself? Have you had any mysteries or?
Yes, the one that
to you?
The one that I find totally unforgettable to this day. I went into teaching when I was a little bit older and a little bit more sensible, and I got the job of being the further education tutor at Gamlingay Village College in Cambridgeshire. Now, the village college system was that you had a warden in charge of the whole shooting match, and you then had the guy in charge of adult education and youth clubs, and the other guy who was called the deputy head, but he was head of the actual day school. Well, I was the bloke who did all the adult education and looked after the youth clubs. And I met, while I worked there, a lifelong friend. We were like brothers. We just headed off with each other. And his name was Billy Farrer. And he was a scientist, and he was head of the science department. And Bill and I, this was a long time ago, Bill and I remained friends for 40 or 50 years. He's still working in the Cambridge area, and I then as headmaster over here in Cardiff. And one day Bill phoned me and said, my doctor has just told me that I have 6 weeks to live. Could you come and see me? And when it's a friend who's as close as a brother, and that, you know, you love as a brother, that I spent every weekend for the next few weeks going over to, as soon as I finished work on a Thursday, I would, Thursday night, I'd be over to just outside Swaffham in Norfolk, where Bill lived, just outside Cambridge. And I spent all the time I could with him, and then he passed over. And then I got home, and his village priest, Father Ian, phoned me and said that he'd been with Bill in the hospital just before he died, and that Bill's last words to his village priest had been to ask me to come over to conduct Bill's funeral. So I said, yes, of course, we're lifelong friends. So I drove over when I finished work on the Thursday. I drove over on the Thursday night. Funeral was planned for the following morning. And if you could imagine two priests with the prayer books open, Ian saying, well, if I read this piece, Father, will you do the next prayer? And then you do the address and I'll do the next read. And as we were there, and it was midnight, as I'd driven over after work all the way over from Cardiff to Cambridge, I suddenly saw Bill. He looked as he had looked when we were young teachers together. He was radiating happiness. When I'd last seen him in the flesh, he looked like a Belsen victim. The illness had pulled him right down to nothing. Now he was a vigorous 30-year-old again and radiating this happiness. And I said, Bill, he said, it's wonderful here. And then he said, tell Ian that Juliana was absolutely right. And then he vanished. Now, Father Ian had seen and heard nothing. He just heard me speaking and wondered what on earth I was up to. And then I took a deep breath and I said, Ian, I'm sorry this sounds strange, but I've just seen Bill. He looked radiantly happy and fit and young again. And he asked me to tell you that Juliana was absolutely right. Now, I had expected that Ian would just shrug his shoulders and say, sorry, old man, I don't know what that means. He didn't. He almost fell off his chair in shock. And when he recovered a little, he said to me in a whisper, you can't have known that. Now, I'm completely confused. What can't I have known? What's all this Juliana business? Now, it transpires that Saint Juliana, who was a nun, had a vision of heaven, that she felt as if her spirit had left her body and she had been in heaven. And the other nuns, thinking she was ill and was about to faint and fall, clustered round her to hold her up. And she recovered. Spirit came back into her body. And she said, no, my sisters, I'm not ill. I've just seen heaven. And of course, all the other girls, oh, Juliana, what is it like? And her words, classic quotation, all shall be well, and all shall be well, and all manner of things shall be well. And Ian, when he had recovered a little more, said, Lionel, when I was with Bill during his last few minutes of life, I told him that story of Saint Juliana visiting heaven and that everything would be wonderful, happiness everywhere. And he said, and you've just driven 300 miles to tell me that Bill is there and that he wants me to know Juliana was right. And that's a true story. And it is a thing that has lived with me ever since. I've never forgotten it. And when I've, as a priest, have been trying to help parishioners who were terminally ill, I've told them that same story, that there is a wonderful hereafter, and that I had this lovely friend, like a brother, who passed and told me what it was like. And that's my real life experience. I've had others which were, you could sort of guess at or otherwise. And I've been in some strange places. The complete contrast to that account, I was, when I was doing another show, a series I did called Castles of Horror, we went to Wavelsburg. And in the Middle Ages, there were witches who lived there in the cellar, and some of whom were tortured and executed. And it was also a place where Nazi leadership had been, and the Nazi stormtroopers had been there. So it was a place in which horrible things had happened and people had suffered terribly. And my camera and sound effects team were up on the roof where they'd gone to set up ready for me to come up. So we were on the castle roof, and they were two very strong, sensible, rational, professional men with the camera equipment and the recordings, and you know how technical and difficult that could be. And when I got there, they were both looking very pale. And from the last person I'd expected it, my cameraman said, "Can we get this in one take?" He said, "We are absolutely terrified. There is something on this roof and we don't know what it is, but we're terrified of it. We've got to take it in one if we can, because we don't want to be up there." And then they suddenly turned to me and said, "Could you do an exorcism?" So I said, "Yes, all priests can do exorcisms." So I said the prayer of exorcism and blessed some water and sprinkled it around where we were working. And we did the shot. I got it in one take for them, and we went down. I felt that there was something lingering, whether it was just something like, you know, some experts on the paranormal would suggest that ancient buildings which are allegedly haunted are not, that it is the, as it were, a sort of memory in the stone.
Like a stone tape.
Yeah, stone tape.
Stone tape. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
And as I said, when two friends whom you greatly respect and who are totally sensible, practical men are shivering with fear on this Wewelsburg castle roof, and I felt there was some combat there when I, as it were, I don't want to boast about it, but when I came to their rescue, because being a priest, I could exorcise or at least clamp down whatever was there. But they were just so thankful to have, finished that shot on the Wewelsburg castle rooftop.
Wow. Amazing.
I've got a total tone shift now with this next question. I do apologise. You're often filmed in a very quirky way on the series. There's one sequence where you're dressed as a mummy while you're singing a song. You're dressed in a nun's habit. Did you enjoy?
Oh yes.
Did you enjoy doing all that?
There's one scene where I think particularly that I recall where we'd done this miniature skeleton, and there was then we'd sort of finished that one. The producer and director had borrowed a coffin from a local undertaker, and the way that you can do this, you know, if you're a director and making things work with a technical team, he got me into the coffin, and then he got me, you know, the technicalities far better than I do. He then had a picture of me opening the coffin lid, only to find myself inside it.
I watched that this morning. I watched that sequence this morning.
You've seen that piece?
I saw it this morning. I watched it this morning. Yeah, in preparation for this, I saw that this morning.
Well, that's an interesting coincidence that you knew the piece I was describing.
Yeah. So, did you enjoy doing all those? Did you make suggestions yourself about what you could do to be?
Oh yes, I put some ideas in. It was I'm just trying to think now. Memory, I said at 87, not being what it was 70 years ago. Yeah, we did the story of, the one that intrigued me, I'd heard about it or read about it somewhere, that there was some trouble in Madame Tussauds, where the waxwork of Hitler grew hair. And we went round and interviewed the staff there, and they took pictures, and they did actually find that they always used real hair on the wax models. And for some unknown reason, there must be a scientific explanation for it, biological explanation, but Hitler's hair kept growing, and they were snipping every month or so. They'd have to snip it off because it was getting right down to here. That was one I was particularly interested in, and the producer was equally happy with that one. And the other one that particularly interested me was the story about the Reverend Griffiths and the Nantaos Cup, which is now allegedly in a secret location and it is said over the years to have had miraculous healing powers. And we, in the program, we put half a dozen or so cases of people who had, in the worst cases, been terminally ill. And by taking water, it was made of olive wood, the Nantios cup, and was believed to have been the cup that was used at the Last Supper. But when you got into the full history of it, it was much older than that. So if it had been used at the Last Supper, it had had religious and theological connections far before the Christianity was established. So that was another one I was particularly interested in. And of course, the other one, let's just have a quick look here. And there was, oh yes, one that I found particularly interesting to put together was that in Kangal in Turkey, there was an inland waterway which was inhabited by the most peculiar fish. And without harming the people who went into this waterway, these little rascals would go all over you. They were about 6 or 8 inches long, so not about the size of a big goldfish in an aquarium. And they actually healed people. They did no harm, but there were people who had been ill and had heard about these, as it were, magical fish, gone into this pool, and these little rascals had come all over them, and without biting the person, they had sort of just gone all over the face and head and neck and right.
I watched that last night. They were
You've seen it?
The tartar from people.
I saw it this morning as well.
That, as I said, we live in a very mysterious world, which was.
I also saw the Hitler's hair growing one this morning as well.
Yeah.
So is there anything you wish the series had covered that you didn't get to do? Is there anything you'd wish you'd done or done in more depth?
Well, I'm very much a believer in the old slogan that age is only a number, and I would love to do a great deal more. So I'm working on one book now, and I do a lot of work with Walters and Jones Publishing, who are now commissioning me for a lot more stuff. And my newest ebooks are on Amazon, and I've got my own YouTube channel, which is called Lionel Fanthorpe Official. And that's got my documentary on it. And I don't want to retire. I just want to go on. I just want to go on working, go on writing, and above all, going and investigating strange things, strange places, and seeing if I can answer some questions.
That interesting.
Sorry, it's got one question. That's a good point to say, Lionel, because I feel in the last couple of decades, gradually, the general public's attitudes towards the paranormal seems to have loosened up a lot. I go on dating sites when I'm single every now and again, and it would be something that I've seen a UFO, a huge black triangle flew overhead. I worked in a haunted shop. Dave has had several experiences over his life. And I used to kind of keep it to myself and tell people when I trusted them. Now I put in my dating app bios, I've seen a UFO. I worked in a haunted shop, because it's an icebreaker. Women will go, tell me all about it. And it seems like people want to know now. Why do you think that attitude? It used to be crackpots that were into these things, and now.
No, I follow your very interesting line of thought there very closely, and I'd agree with you that there's been a huge change over the years. And what I think may have caused it, leading scientists 100 years ago would try to dismiss ghosts, monsters, the abnormal as, oh, that's not scientific, we can't bother with that, somebody's been imagining some rubbish. But now the scientists are telling us about dark matter, and they're telling us about secrets of the universe, which are, well, just inexplicable. And as leading scientists now join with people like you and me and Dave and say that this is a mysterious universe and we do need to explore it, and exploring it. I mean, I'm quite sure that our Earth cannot be the only place where there is intelligent life. When we think of the size of the universe, and then of recent years where physicists and astronomers have spoken to us about a multiverse, where there's not one enormous universe, but there are loads of these mysterious universes. And they're all, as it were, like pages in a book, lying against each other. And what I found fascinating from one of the sort of leading astrophysicists is the possibility that on some of these parallel universes, versions of us exist. And he suggested that this could explain the mystery of doppelgangers, where somebody has slid through from an adjacent universe, slightly different from my version of me on Earth, your version of you on Earth, but there are versions of us on a parallel universe. And that, coming from a top scientist, I find absolutely intriguing. I think this is really why you and I and a lot of our friends and colleagues are more ready to accept that there are mysteries. And it's not weird to see a mystery. It's not strange to see a ghost or to find that something very odd is happening, like that pool full of little fish that can heal diseases. Come on, boys, let's swim as far as you can. No, I've just got to keep harping on it because I've got another. Let me just check my notes. I'm sure I've got my next interview. What have I done with it?
I think we are nearly at time. We are on for half an hour. I think we're about half an hour now. So I'll very quickly ask you the last question, if that's okay.
Yes, of course.
Yeah. If obviously the series is an absolute joy, but if somebody who'd never seen it before was hovering over the purchase of it right now, what would you say to them to convince them to get the series and enjoy it in you?
Wow.
That's a big question.
I think about the only thing I could say is, if you're thinking of watching it, I think you will enjoy it. And I think that what you would enjoy is the mixture, is the fact that sometimes we're looking at deep theological questions, deep philosophical questions, and the next one is we're falling over backwards in the mud and being dragged out by our director. That it combines what I hope is good humor with a real serious question about the meaning of the universe and whether these mysteries mean something deeper. And that's what I would say if anyone was asking me whether they would enjoy the series. I said, well, I hope you will, because I did my best with it. And it's a mixture.
You did absolutely fabulous. This has been an absolute joy.
Yeah, it's been fantastic. We could talk all day, I think, Dave.
We could book you for 5 more interviews, and we still want to talk about it.
Gentlemen, you are very kind to me.
Thank you so much.
And I'm ever so grateful to you. And I have had tremendous pleasure from working with 2 new friends, if I may call you that.
Thank you so much, Lionel. That's much appreciated.
Lionel, me and Dave and Bob, our other member, we're planning a podcast, a Scarred for Life podcast next year.
Yeah,
would you be open to come on and just have a nice chat?
I would love to. Count me in.
Fantastic. Absolutely fantastic. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for your time.
Okay.
So best wishes to you.
Bye for now. God bless you both.